used to be.
Yeah, yeah. When they had the European influence.
Yeah, when Canada had European influence, the Greeks, the Italians, the Portuguese, the Polish came later, the Hungarians came later, but they came. And the
Yep.
Irish were first, right? Were one of the first to come and build this country. But yeah,
Yep.
it used to be God. This used to be in God we trust in Canada. But now it's pulling one over us all every other week, pulling one over us.
Yeah. And the common thing with too was from non-Canadians was asking about this Carney clown, and some British people were telling me that are you guys seriously gonna get us elect that guy? And I said, it's not a matter of electing him. It's they're gonna select him. It's not a matter of we have no choice. So you know,
I
and they were
told you
just
they're gonna.
shocked. They go,
I told you he was gonna win this election back in January. I told you he's gonna be
yeah,
selected, and he's
yeah.
gonna win the public sector vote. And that guy from England that was talking to you, the guy from the UK that was talking, because he knows that Carney went there and took the capital flows from China and destroyed the housing market there too.
Yep. Yeah, I watched that video you put on there too about the money laundering in the banks, in that in the hotel and everything. That was quite the story.
Mm-hmm.
Quite the story.
Oh, that was a
That's
great story,
amazing.
man. Don't thank me.
Yeah.
Thank the guy that told me it.
No, I know, but thanks for letting us know about it because that was incredible. I actually let some other people listen to it, and they're
Mm-hmm.
they're like, "Holy crap!" I said, "Yeah, this is Canada. This, this is the Commonwealth." Yeah.
Yeah, bring your money, plant it here, and your money is yeah. Yeah. Let's build our economy. Let's build a bunch of homes, and the
Yeah.
Canadians can't afford them because they can't afford to get into their own real estate. And let's sell them to China, and then they could bid it up and through bidding wars.
Someone brought up a point too. TD Bank got fined 5 billion. Was it for basically harboring money, laundering
Yeah, we
money,
we
like
yeah
money
we
from?
we covered that. That was a
Yeah,
year ago. That was a year and a half ago.
yeah,
Yeah, we covered,
yeah,
and then CIBC, I think it was like 2 years ago. We covered that. We covered the ones
yeah.
in Westpac down in Australia. We covered all the Australian banks that were caught. I think it was Westpac had 21 million money laundering infractions, not $21 million laundered. 21 million money laundering infractions in 1 year.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I saw a Scotia Bank in Dominican.
Yes,
That
it's a
was I was
Caribbean
surprised
bank
by.
too. Scotia Bank's in Mexico, and it's
Yeah,
in the Caribbean.
yeah. Okay. Yeah, yeah. I didn't know they were in Caribbean. Yeah, that's like definitely a place to go. That's definitely a place to go. It's
Hmm.
very beautiful. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Yeah. So what else is going on there? And
Well,
so
everyone's yeah.
you're getting screwed around with the tariffs there, eh? With your business. I
I
see
am.
too, eh?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a bugger. Jeez.
And I'm already in a town that hates me, and I'm already in a town like everything's like adding up. Like every equation that could go against me is going up. But yeah, everything that could go against me is going against me. Like everything.
Well, I can
And
get you a family discount on bulletproof vests there. You can come to Winnipeg.
no, no, it's too cold. It's too cold to be out there. I don't. It's just too cold. It's too cold here. We got 4 seasons, but we really have 4 seasons where I live. And then when spring hits, it's spring. When summer hits, it's summer. When fall hits, it's fall. Where you are, it's like cold 9 months, 8 months, 9 months of the year. It's cold. I don't want to deal with that. You know.
Our summers are some of the best around.
Hmm.
Period. But no, I hear what you're saying. Our winters suck. But our winter, everybody was complaining about in Ontario was complaining how much snow they got and everything, and we barely got any snow in Winnipeg this
Yeah.
year.
But I'm just saying,
So
the further east you go, the worse it gets when it comes to cold, frigid weathers, right?
yeah, true enough.
The further
But
west, you know what? Anchorage, where was Fairbanks or whatever there, Anchorage or in Alaska there had better weather than Toronto, warmer weather, above zero.
yeah, one person was talking about like I know my buddy's also Portuguese. He's talking about they were talking about the Azores. They said it was the most beautiful place that they've been to. One of the top three, and they've traveled all over the world. They say the Azores are beautiful. I want to go to the Algarve again this summer.
Oh, that's South Portugal though.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm talking South Portugal. That's
Yeah,
where I want to go. I want to go to Monte Gordo. That's where I was before.
Montegordo.
Yeah, Montegordo. Yeah, that's a beautiful place. I remember I was there a couple years ago, and I go, "Damn, it's hot today," and it's like 38, 39. And then this British guy goes, "Hey, mate, you're 15 minutes from Africa."
Yeah, yeah,
I
it's
said,
right
"Yeah,
across
it's
the
pretty
Gibraltar
damn
there.
hot." Yeah, it's hot. It was hot there. Wow, what the ocean was super warm. It was like it was got to be in the 80s.
they will send you to prison, or in Trump's case, and I've warned about this, assassination. So I said, if you're not prepared to go to prison, if you're not prepared to sacrifice your life, you're in the wrong line of work. This is all out political warfare between two sides of the United States that.
Why is Labour so hesitant to confront the rape gang scandal head on? They promised 5 local inquiries, but this week they flip-flopped into confirming how many there will be. After decades of silence, is this really about justice or about protecting reputations? Some have suggested the reason for this is concern over what a real investigation might uncover was going on for so many years in predominantly Labour-run areas. And why does it seem yet again as though the victims of mass sexual abuse come second when it comes to politics? I'm joined now by the editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater. Welcome. It was kind of shocking this week when Jess Phillips announced just before Parliament went into recess and made this announcement that actually this pitiful £5 million that was kind of a consolation prize from January, they weren't even going to do that.
No, absolutely. I think the way in which it was announced tells you everything you need to know about Labour and the political class in general. Their relationship with the survivors of this particular tragedy, how often they're just heaping one betrayal on another. This was snuck out, as you say, right before recess. These 5 localised inquiries were already seen as a bit of paltry, bit of an insulting measure to many victims who've been calling for a full national inquiry. So to then downgrade that even further, only Oldham is going to get its local inquiry. The rest will have what were deemed more flexible measures, i.e. even more toothless than what they were already going to have. And it really did feel like they were just trying to bury the news. And it came even just a few weeks after Tom Crowther, KC, who is going to lead the Oldham inquiry and was also originally tapped to basically help the government set up these local inquiries when there were going to be more than one. He had said he hadn't heard anything from the government. It got to the point where he actually approached the Home Office and said, can I be of any assistance? So given the fact that all of those announcements were only made in January, the fact that we're seeing a climb down just a few months later, I think has gone down, obviously and quite understandably, as yet another betrayal in 2 decades worth of them, as it is at this point.
I mean, do you think that the government are going to learn? I mean, to be fair, there was no real inquiry under the Tories. I mean, they would sort of argue that there was, but it was a much wider scope. There hasn't been a specific inquiry on this particular, this travesty. And it feels like, obviously, it all kicked off after Elon Musk brought it to attention after Charlie Peter's here. But why are they not grasping how angry people are and how that there is this need, particularly from, of course, the victims, to have some kind of closure, exposure and closure?
No, absolutely, because there was always going to be an argument about whether or not a national inquiry would have been the right solution. You know, there is a way in which inquiries have just become a way for governments to almost pass the buck. They take a very long time. They cost an awful lot of money. By the time some of the politicians who might have been implicated in some of these scandals, by the time the report actually comes through, they're often out of politics somewhere else. So there was an argument to say, is this the right way forward? But given that we're in an era, particularly where Labour, before they got into power, were calling for an inquiry every time one of the Tories passed wind, I mean, it suggested that they took this horrendous scandal that had been going on for many decades, completely ignored, covered up in many places for the reasons we'll probably get into, to suggest that didn't deserve that kind of status, which was obviously taken as a huge blow. Even if they came up with something that sounded like a more powerful alternative. One of the things the last Tory government actually did do in this area, which is of some genuine use, is they set up this task force, which just recently made its 1,000th arrest on the grooming gangs scandal. You think leaning into that, giving that more resources, giving more resources to another task force which could look at the culpability of local councillors, local police, and to make sure that heads actually roll, because they never really have in relation to this. Even if they came up with a kind of counter-offer, a counter-measure that seemed to signal we take this seriously and we're going to deliver justice, that would have been one thing. But they did neither, and I think that's why people are feeling particularly betrayed this time around.
Yeah, and then their actions this week suggest that they just want it to go away.
Yeah.
They just desperately want it to go away as quickly as possible. Is it possible that it would go away? Do you think that this is that they're actually strategically for them, they are making the right call? I mean, I find it abhorrent, but if it comes down to just politics, do you think that people will just stop caring?
I think the genie is out of the bottle on this one. I mean, people have known a lot about this scandal since at least 2011, when you start to see the Times exposés on what was going on in Rotherham and Rochdale. People are very aware of this. Unfortunately, it took Elon Musk to force the politicians to respond, but there's been widespread knowledge of what has been going on, widespread concern amongst the public. I think the profile of this issue, as it's been raised by this channel and Charlie Peters' work, you can't unwind that. And if Labour thinks that they can, then they're going to be in for a rude awakening. And the question is, why are they doing all of this? I mean, there's one sense in which they've got it into their heads that to take this issue too seriously is to feed some kind of far-right culture war. We all remember when this issue raised its head again in January, and Keir Starmer accused people calling for a national inquiry on the Tory side as jumping on a far-right bandwagon. There is still a bit of that going on, because it's far-right to care about child rape now, apparently. But then there's also this kind of sense of it's this uncomfortable truth. And I'm not a mind reader, but the fact that many of these scandals took place in areas which had Labour-run councils, which had Labour MPs, in a grim political calculation where you can understand why that might make them more hesitant. But surely all the more reason to just look into this as clear-cut as possible and to try and just draw the poison from this issue. Surely that would be better not just for the country, but for the Labour Party, if it wants to be taken seriously in the working-class constituencies, which are increasingly turning away with them, not just turning away from them, not just because of this issue, but this is probably the most grotesque one of those issues on which Labour has betrayed the people it used to represent.
And then having Jess Phillips out there, and there's this clip of her sort of almost being scornful when the Tory MP raises this and raises the ethnicity of the perpetrators, but she speaks so eloquently and forcefully on other victims, but then when it comes to the victims here, suddenly becomes timid.
Exactly, and I think that is not just an over-reading of that particular exchange in Parliament. There are other points in Jess Phillips's career where her previous firm convictions, where it comes to violence against women and girls, seems to be moderated a little bit. I mean, there was the Cologne sex attacks on New Year's Eve a few years ago, and she appeared on Question Time shortly afterwards, and she said something which I don't think it's unfair to say seemed to downplay them. She said that she likened it to the sort of heckling that would go on Birmingham Broad Street of a Saturday night. So you can't help but feel, and it's not just Jess Phillips, and it's not as if I think these people are bad people necessarily. It's that I think they're captured by an ideology which sorts crises and scandals like this on the kind of hierarchy of victimhood that we talk so often about. And because of the fact that in these cases, the ones that were covered up, it seems they were covered up because there was official nervousness about talking about the perpetrators, because they tended to be Pakistani Muslim, and the victims tended to be ignored because they were often very poor white girls who were dismissed by the police and the authorities as essentially child prostitutes. That because of all of this, there's a particular nervousness about talking about it, but you just can't help but get over it. Yeah. There is lives that have been ruined by this, and that has been enabled by a state which looked the other way in so many different cases.
Listen, Jess Phillips is not here to defend herself, and I guess the reason why I bring up her name is because I've been a fan of her in the past. I've been a fan of what she has pushed in terms of fighting against violence towards women. But it just feels like there's an hypocrisy when it comes to this issue, and I think it feels to me like it almost hurts the other things that she advocates for. And one final point is, what do you think about the government response since? Because it feels like they kind of got busted and then they came out afterwards like, no, we weren't doing that at all. We weren't trying to hide it away. We're actually doing loads of amazing stuff, and that you're being ridiculous.
No, I just don't think anyone's going to buy any of that now. We see what has happened. We see the fact that an already pretty meagre set of measures announced in January have been rolled back in quite a meaningful fashion. And I just wish that they could recognise that actually taking this issue seriously would probably stand them in a lot better stead amongst the communities that that were hit by this, certainly. But also, there's this implication, which you see come up in a lot of the commentary and kind of implied by some of Labour's discussion of it as well, which is to take the issue of Pakistani grooming gangs too seriously would somehow to alienate Pakistani Muslim voters in the inner cities, as if they're going to be personally offended that paedophiles are being locked up. What a horrendous conflation to make. What a horrendous smear to make on that section of society. So it's one of those things where I don't know, I understand why they're doing it, but I think it's incredibly ill thought through on the level of just morality, politics, but also supposedly meeting the goals that they want to, which is a genuinely harmonious society in which we can recognise where issues like this come up, deal with them precisely so that they don't fester and grow and cause more problems. Yeah, well, let's see if Labour are going to learn this. And thank you so much, Tom Slater, editor of Spiked. A Labour Party spokesman said the claims in this article are completely unfounded. The Labour government is providing major investment to tackle child sexual exploitation and abuse and to pursue truth and justice for victims of those most heinous crimes. We are funding new police investigations to reopen historic cases, and Baroness Casey is currently reviewing the nature, scale and characteristics of grooming gangs offending across the country, including the question of ethnicity, and we won't hesitate to go further. Next on Free Speech Nation, ADF's
for the ones ensuring the job always gets done, and the ones wearing many hats. Grainger offers professional-grade industrial supplies and real-time product availability. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
It's, in a sense, risky to try to change the entire narrative. When I show
there was a lot of commentary out there, including his Secretary of Commerce and even me saying, hey, you know, Trump will be negotiating between now and the end of his current term, before his third term. And he put out the word, no negotiations. They are what they are. So I think you show as he stepped into this decision. This is core Trump. This is something he's been thinking about for 40 years, but really thinking deeply about with his advisors since the election was stolen, went to Mar-a-Lago. But so, and I think this narrative just on and on and on, particularly by people on the left who want to be populist or understand that the reason that they lost is that the Democrats abandoning the working class in this country and they won't support them or vote for them anymore. You would think that they would try to at least understand the populist economic nationalist policy in bringing massive amount of capital investment in plant and equipment here and bringing plants and bringing high value added jobs back.
But that's the key point, isn't it? And isn't it more honest to say, look, we know that this is going to have an impact on prices. If you put at least a 10%, in some cases much higher,
but it doesn't mean
there's going to be an impact on the price.
It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean the increased costs flow to the consumer. Let me repeat this. You can add everybody combined, and we don't buy as much as we buy from China. I think it's the net trade deficit with China is $500 or $600 billion. We are essentially to the Chinese what the colonies of America used to be to Great Britain during the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. We're just shipping raw materials. We send very little finished product because they've gutted all our factories and sent them to China. So in buying that 500 billion and 600 billion is actually more because that's the net deficit. In buying that amount of finished product from China, prices didn't go up in 18 and 19. They just didn't. In Christmas of 19, we had virtually no inflation, lowest interest rates we've ever had, exploding growth, 3.5% growth. We had blue collar wages rising faster than white collar. We had non-college graduates raising higher than college graduates. That's kind of the economic nationalist model of Trump, and we're restricting immigration at the time. Since that time, Biden's exploded, invited in 10 million illegal alien invaders to drive down wage costs among unskilled workers. But there's no evidence when Trump did this the first time, not a scintilla evidence from the largest partner we buy from on finished goods that there was any price increase. There was no price increase we could see when we put the steel tariffs in. So they try to use this to scare people. The two reasons for tariffs is, number one, and I think for people in Great Britain to understand, is that this is a premium market. The United States is a premium market. So what President Trump, he thinks about, he says, hey, it's like buying a skybox at a sporting event or front row tickets to a concert. To get into this market, you're going to have to pay a premium, okay, to get access to the biggest the deepest consumer market in the world. There's two ways to do that. You either stay outside and manufacture your finished products, and you're going to pay a tolling fee to get in here. I think the reciprocal tariffs are in Great Britain, I think it was 10%, if memory serves me correctly. Or you have an option. You have an option to come and move your manufacturing to the United States. I think he'd rather have the manufacturing come to the United States. But if not, we have an external revenue service now that Peter Navarro says in the auto tariffs alone will bring in $100 billion. Remember, just think about this for a second. We sell essentially $800 billion of cars in the United States a year, okay? Of that, only 500 billion of that are made overseas, Germany, Japan, etc. Even of the 350 or 300 billion that are manufactured here, they're really not manufactured, they're assembled. We take still the high value added finished goods, the drive train, the engine from either Germany, or in Mexico, we're making it for the Germans. So, or the Japanese. That all has to stop. We have to and this is about bringing high value added manufacturing jobs to the United States. And certainly it's going to cause a little turbulence. I mean, we essentially, I think, went to economic war with the Chinese Communist Party yesterday. Those are particularly where Xi is on his economic revival, which they're in very bad straits. These tariffs, I think, could put Xi out of business. So it's both geoeconomic and resetting the post-war international rules-based order, but it's also geostrategic.
Lots of companies tried to outsource their manufacturing away from China and into other Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam.
Cambodia.
Right.
Cambodia had a bad day. Cambodia had a bad day yesterday.
Exactly. So is putting 50% tariffs on countries like Vietnam strategically a smart thing to do when you're trying to decouple from China, when you're trying to encourage people to stop building in China?
Well, and decoupling with China, we want to bring those jobs back to the United States. Yes, there's still going to be product made in Cambodia and these other places, but why? It's just reciprocal. Remember, President Trump's adamant. If you bring the tariffs down, and particularly on reciprocity, you bring the non-tariff barriers, which is really where the juice is. You bring that down, we'll let bygones be bygones.
Right, but it's not reciprocal, though, because the data that they're relying on is the trade deficit. They're not actually talking about specific tariffs those countries have implemented or non-tariff barriers. They've made that calculation, and the White House have said this, they've admitted this, based on the trade deficit in goods with the United States. So how is that reciprocal?
What's reciprocal to that country? You've got to work with us to decrease
the deficit, but not to the.
But you have to do what you have to do to work and make sure that we somehow take care of that deficit. The accumulate, because everybody talks about our debt here, the $37 trillion in debt. We're going to have, I think, the Biden, last year is going to be, I think, near $1 trillion trade deficit. We have a cumulative trade deficit, I believe, of $25 trillion. They're kind of inextricably linked with debt, but the globalists never want to talk about trade deficit. They say, oh, it doesn't really matter. It matters tremendously. That was the wages of United States workers going overseas to pay something, or it's the monetization of certain assets we have to pay for it. So no, I think each country in its own way will work out some sort of individual deal. President Trump said he's open. Right now, he says no negotiations because I think he wants a time for them to kind of realize that he's serious about this. And he is serious about this. His primary focus is the economic rejuvenation of the United States. And I think that's very powerful. And for the American people, it's been an eye-opener. Because remember, one of the reasons we're $37 trillion in debt is we have a $1 trillion defense bill. Why do we have a $1 trillion defense bill? Well, we're underwriting the security of Western Europe, of the Persian Gulf and the Gulf Emirates, of around the South China Sea and the Straits of Malacca, and then up to Northwest Asia with Japan and Korea. That has to stop. We're upside down. We have trade deficits basically with every part of the. You go around the horn, around the rim of the Eurasian landmass. We have trade deficits everywhere. We can't continue. He's trying to bring down the financial deficit. At the same time, he's trying to bring down the trade deficit. And this is the first time in our history, even with Reagan, that any president has stepped up and said, my first priority is American workers. And I'm going to show you how it's going to happen because I'm basically going to lay out a new economic model for the world. And the world can think about it, adjust to it, and then come to us. I'm sure they'll have open discussions.
Right, you mentioned Ronald Reagan. I'm going to quote from Reagan. This was when he was president. He was massively against the tariffs that occurred in the early 1930s during the Great Depression. He said, you see at first when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes that works for a short while. What eventually occurs is homegrown industries start relying on government protection in the form of high tariffs. They stop competing and making innovative management and technological changes they need to succeed in world markets. And then something even worse happens. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries. The result is more tariffs, higher and higher trade barriers, and less competition.
Okay, Thatcher, I don't need to be, okay, I got it. I understand what Reagan said. Reagan and Thatcher were neoliberal neocons, okay? At that time, in trying to take on the Soviet Union, I appreciate that. But also remember, Ronald Reagan was coming in at the beginning of which we had been a manufacturing superpower. And Carter started to, as soon as we started running trade deficits and we stopped protecting American industries from mercantilist systems, this is not, that right there is a fantasy. It's a fantasy that comes out of the kind of the National Review and all the intellectual conservatives like the Tory party that have gotten us into this situation, that gutted England, that gutted the United States because they believed in the system of fair trade when it's not fair. This is a complete mercantilist system, as reciprocity just showed the American people. The American people didn't know that all these tariffs and trade barriers were up against our allies. There were underwriting. This is the whole thing like with Europe. In Europe, it's quite frankly, we've been underwriting your defense since World War II, and we're kind of underwriting your prosperity. That's going to end. We're going to get prosperous here. President Trump is just wrong. The system that worked, that when we broke off of the monopolistic power of the British Crown, and one of the reasons people don't understand this, we broke off not just for political freedom, but also economic freedom. What drove the revolutionary generation as much as the suppression of their first free speech, that we couldn't even do cartoons about the king and pamphlets or we'd be shut down, was also what the crown did in corrupting, the crown and the aristocracy did in corrupting commons and giving monopolistic power to entities like the British East India Company or other industrial combines. That what England had gotten to at that time was kind of how the United States runs today, right? Oligarchic power with state power combined, you have a system. That's what our revolution broke away from. And what happened? A document that's just as dear to us, economic populists and nationalists, as the Declaration of Independence, which was really a declaration of war against the empire, and the Constitution, which tried to get this thing organized later, is the Report on Manufacturers by Alexander Hamilton, who was a true economic nationalist. That's the third founding document of the United States. And what happened from the American plan from the beginning of the from the beginning of the country right after the Revolution all the way up to the early 20th century, and particularly through McKinley, we certainly protected. And some of the biggest protectionists of protection our native industries were not just Alexander Hamilton, but a guy named Abraham Lincoln, right? And then McKinley, they understood. And this is what drove us, although the Industrial Revolution started in England.